January. I was excited a little while ago to see some first signs of spring. I was sitting there in Barn Church and I was looking at the gravel patch in front of me and I noticed a sprout of green pushing through the rocks. Now, I know for a lot of people that might not seem very significant, but I sat there for a while looking at it, just kind of admiring it. I mean, it's pushing itself up in the midst of this sea of rocks, no other green around. And no doubt you have seen pictures of this. I mean, you've seen it in your own gravel patch, perhaps, but I'm talking about pictures of seeing life where we didn't expect to see life. We've seen them on the internet of flowers pushing through asphalt, or trees growing on the side of cliffs. We take these pictures or we look at these pictures, and there's captions underneath of these pictures, and these things inspire us. We have quotes underneath of them. We're impressed by them. When we find life where we don't expect to find life, and rightly so. But then in the natural world, there are examples on the opposite spectrum of this. Plants that have been given every single opportunity to grow, to thrive, but for one reason or another, they fail to do so. And if you've got a garden or you've planted a garden before, perhaps you know the pain of this, of planting, perhaps going out and getting those specific tomato plants and doing everything that you can to make sure that they grow and they thrive, that you can have tomatoes all summer long. But when you go to the vine, you get to the vine and you're disappointed after your investment, after your watering, after your weeding, to find little or no return. A few seasons ago, my brother had this exact experience. He spent no expense. He spared no expense to get his tomato plants going. And at the end of the day, at the end of the season, he only got like 5 tomatoes. It was very frustrating for him and exasperating. Those of you who have planted a garden, you can understand this. But God too knows this frustration. But when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking just about gardening, for he is an expert gardening and he understands plants, but I'm talking about people. And not just groups, not just us individually, but also groups of people. Listen to the warning that he spoke through the prophet Isaiah concerning his people. He said, "My well beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. He dug it up and cleared out of its stones and planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in its midst and also made a winepress in it. So he expected it to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes." Or listen through how God said it through the prophet Jeremiah concerning his people. He says, "Yeah, I have planted you a noble vine, a seed of highest quality. How then have you turned before me into a degenerate plant of an alien vine?" Jesus himself would speak a parable in Luke 13, saying, "A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Then he said to the keeper in his vineyard, 'Look, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground?' But he answered and said to him, 'Sir, let it alone this year also, that I dig around it and fertilize it, and if it bears fruit, well, and if not, then you can cut it down.'" When a farmer plants something, there's an expectation of a return of that investment. There is an expectation of figs or grapes or grain or fruit. And when there is no fruit, or when the fruit is not there, after all the conditions have been given, all the conditions for fruit production have been given, well, that can be pretty frustrating. God has given these warnings to his people through the prophets, and Jesus repeated these warnings to his disciples, that we keep an eye on the fruit that is being produced in our lives and through our lives. Now, the Bible mentions both quality and quantity, and both are important. They're important to God, and they should be important to us, for we will be judged on these things. And that in itself is a very sobering thought. These examples that were given by the prophets and given by Jesus were for this very reason, to sober us up, to sober his people up when we think about judgment. God is expecting a return on his investment. His investment. Oh, yes. The blood of his Son, which purchased us, which redeemed us. The fact that we can hold in our hands or on our screens his word, brought through the centuries. That in itself is an incredible gift that cost many people their lives. And God is expecting a return on this investment. But thankfully, Jesus has also given us the secret on how this is to be achieved. In John 15, Jesus is talking with his disciples shortly before he's talking to his disciples, and he gives the famous reference about the vine and the branches when he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. He says, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. Speaking of pruning and bearing fruit, pruning may not be a very happy process. I've got a friend in Brazil who had a big mango tree on his property, and it just, for years, it barely produced anything. He's a gringo like me. And one day, a Brazilian pastor went to go visit him, and he said, "What's wrong with this tree?" Because it was in the fruit bearing season, and my friend said, that fruit trees never really produced much fruit. So this Brazilian pastor said, "Give me a machete," and he took this machete and he went around the trunk of this tree, just whacking it, putting notches in it, and he said, "All right, that should do it." Well, I imagine that hurt that tree. But my friend David, he said he had never seen the tree the next season be so loaded down with fruit. It wasn't a great process for the tree to go through, to be whacked, to be pruned. Man, how it was important. In verse 5, Jesus continues this how process. He says, I am the vine and you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. For without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, that they may gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so that you will be my disciples. As Christians, should not be ignorant that with God there is an expected return on his investment. But neither shall we take it upon ourselves the burden to produce for ourselves. For Jesus had said in verse 6, apart from him, we can do nothing. Therefore, our work as Christians, how we will produce this harvest, a good fruit, is to simply abide in Christ, to let his words abide in us. And as we do, they'll transform us more into his image. And as we do, the fruit will come, fruit that we can be proud of, but more importantly, fruit that he can be proud of. Hope you're encouraged as you go through this day. Have a great day and God bless. Ciao.